everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff,
Yes, Joe. How are you this evening?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you. How are
Good.
you?
I'm all right. I think I'm getting over the yet another winter bug that comes on after every party I seem to attend this year. But
Yeah, you sound a little bit
yeah,
rough.
yeah, I'm a little raspy, but I feel all right. I'm just healing.
Yeah,
So
I'm ready for spring.
yeah, right.
I've been ready for spring since Labor Day. So
Well, yeah, and I always consider spring to start on St. Patrick's Day. I don't care what the weather is.
yeah.
I know that's earlier than the actual vernal equinox or whatever, but I say St. Patrick's Day starts spring.
And she had a great career as a burlesque performer. Vernal Equinox.
Oh,
Yeah,
that was a drag
she was
queen.
good. Yeah, no. Well, there may be one. That's Verna Equinox, named after
Okay.
the original.
At
Yeah.
first, I thought you were talking about St. Patrick. I didn't even know he had a burlesque career, but that's
Well, she did Saint Patty
oh,
because,
okay.
with T's, which is not, but it's Patty Patrick. So, then never mind. That's another discussion which we can talk about at the
Or
appropriate
not,
time. Yeah, exactly. Um,
or not ever.
yes, had occasion to be served the favorite Irish whiskey of hotelier from Ireland in New York City, and it was very nice. I
Oh,
find Irish whiskeys are. I was thinking about it, maybe something we could talk about. That Irish whiskeys, I think, are for telling telling stories.
all
Um,
right.
Scotch is for reading stories, and bourbon is for bullshitting people. So
So now,
it's all stories though.
so where does Canadian whiskey fall into that in your spectrum or your matrix?
As yet to be added to the list, to the
Okay.
description. So
All right. Well, that's you're right. We could do a whole matrix of
yeah. Well,
what
like I
whiskeys.
used to say, it was it red wine for grading undergraduate papers and bourbon for grading graduate papers sometimes, and maybe the other way around. So,
Well, while we're on the subject, what are you drinking this evening?
well, I happen to have a mug of hot chocolate that's been corrected
Okay.
with some bourbon. So
Oh, all right.
yeah.
I've and chocolate seems to be the theme. I've got the con Confections of a Chocoholic bourbon from Indiana Whiskey,
Ah.
which is just it's something that something about the way they have aged it, barreled it,
Mhm.
whatever, gives it a little chocolatey sort of aftertaste.
Nice.
But so,
Here, here.
and mine's just straight up.
I have a visitor in the studio here.
Oh, is it the
Hank.
famous Hank or is it one of the cats?
Hank. Yes, it's Hank, the Basset Hound, who you can't see, but okay. Um, so tonight, um, we watched a video, and I've seen this fellow before, used clips from him in classes. His name is Simon Sinek, very well known speaker, marketing consultant, expert, and I've used his presentation about beginning with why and the golden circle and other things. But he gave one specifically about performance versus trust.
Yeah. Yeah,
And the,
I saw this and thought it would make a good um, basis for a discussion here.
so we'll show the clip, but I want to describe it in case we
In case
have
it doesn't,
problems showing the clip,
yeah.
where he describes his experience with organizations and talks about um, which people are most valuable to an organization and whether we actually do an effective job of measuring that. We can expand on that after I show the clip.
Well, yes, and in particular, his experience or his encounter with the training methods and instructors for SEAL Team 6
Yes.
is where he encounters this.
Yes.
So I found that
Okay.
interesting. But yeah, let's show the clip.
Okay. Okay. There it is.
I work with the Navy. I've worked with the Navy SEALs, and I asked them, like, how do you pick like the guys that go on SEAL Team 6, right? Because they're the best, the best, the best, the best. And they drew a graph for me, and on one side they wrote the word performance, and on the other side they wrote the word trust. The way they define the terms is performance on the battlefield and performance off the battlefield. So this is your skills. This is, did you make your quarterly earnings, whatever, however you want to translate it, right? Performance, traditional. This is, how are you off the battlefield? What kind of person are you? The way they put it is, I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money and my wife? This is what they told me. Nobody wants this person, the low performer of low trust, of course. Of course, everybody wants this person, the high performer of high trust. Of course. What they learned is that this person, the high performer of low trust, is a toxic leader and a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over this person. This is the highest performing organization on the planet, and this person is more important than this person. And the problem in business is we have lopsided metrics. We have 1,000,001 metrics to measure someone's performance and negligible to no metrics to measure someone's trustworthiness. And so what we end up doing is promoting or bonusing toxicity in our businesses, which is bad for the long game because it eventually destroys the whole organization. The irony is it's unbelievably easy to find these people. Go to any team and say, who's the asshole? And they will all point to the same person. Equally, if you go to any team and say, who do you trust more than anybody else? Who's always got your back? And when the chips are down, they will be there with you. They will also all point to the same person. It's the best gifted natural leader who's creating an environment for everybody else to succeed. And they may not be your most individual highest performer. But that person, you better keep them on your team.
So,
He even inspires us to,
yeah,
asks
to
us to share
share.
it.
So, um, so I, uh, I certainly can say in my professional career, in my work experience, that that's exactly correct. There were people who were individual performers, but you could not trust them. And it reminds me of a similar thing that people have said, the two beers and a puppy uh,
Yes,
test. Would you have two beers with this person? Would you trust them to babysit your puppy for a weekend? And
right.
the person who you'd have one beer with, well, but not two, is a cordial, your professional distant relationship. Two beers, they may be fun, but you don't trust them with your puppy. There are people would you trust them with your puppy? And maybe they don't even drink beer, which is more important.
Right. Well, and that analogy is really more about the whole trust, not
Yes.
so much about a performance, right?
Yes.
As in the first video, but it's almost all about trust. Not only trust, but it's personability, right? It's the two beers is how personable they are.
Yes.
Because after one beer, you can do small talk and finish your beer and leave.
Yeah.
Having a second beer with somebody usually means you've gone beyond small talking. You're having an actual conversation. It's hard to have a real conversation with someone you don't like.
I think we should add this into the Irish whiskey, Scotch, bourbon, beer. That whole the conversational elements of that. It's a new, entirely new theory. I think we can propose.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that's correct. You know, would you trust somebody? And I've heard other things from cynics saying you don't get people to trust you by doing things for them. You get people to trust you by asking them for help
Right.
because you're trusting them enough to you are reaching out to say, "Would you help me?" Which means you're trusting them and to not reject you, to offer help, to do what they can. And so they in turn trust you. And so trust is, I think, born of it's reciprocal.
Hmm.
Um, I think it also comes from being as good as your word, which takes us to veritas. You know, is somebody as good as will they do what they say they do? And
Right.
meaning to the quality, to the time, as you ask, as they say they'll do it, can you trust them to be as good as their word?
Right. And so, and we both looked at this, and I at least immediately found the parallels to our selecting of peerages in the society that we belong to,
Yes.
in particular the knights, the members of chivalry.
Yeah.
That this is very whether no nobody has really talked about it in those terms before, but that's those two axes are what we talk about.
Yes, they are. And I
Um,
think it's a really good analogy. And for, you know, those few people who listen to us who may not be aware, we belong to an organization called the Society for Creative Anachronism. It's a medieval reenactment organization. Within that organization, there are peerages, including knighthood and a service award and an arts recognition that for various performance
right,
quality in the martial arts and the fine arts and in service to the organization. And um, so those are all performance based criteria, but we say each of those people has to be a peer, have peer like qualities, meaning they're trustworthy. They embody the chivalric virtues, the other chivalric virtues.
right,
They're courteous and so on,
right.
and generous and but how to judge that is is one of the challenges that we have.
Well, and all of it in the clip, he talks about having metrics, and we don't think in terms of metrics. All of our judgment on everything is subjective to the individual, and we reach some consensus usually
Yes,
that way. So it's not that you have to have a unanimous vote to induct someone. Generally you need a certain amount of consensus, and then there is a deciding body in this case, in our case,
yes,
the crown.
yes. Um,
Um,
Certainly
but
we've both tried, I think, over the years to be more objective than subjective by saying, here are the
yes,
criteria I look for. Does somebody has somebody, and I put it in terms of artistic mastery. Does somebody have control of the tools of art or service or martial prowess, and they use them at the right time in the right way to create
right,
the art, to achieve success in this, and do so. They have that level of performance expertise in it.
right.
Um, but I
In the
think
martial arts, we can do a sort of objective testing, but even in our sport, our objective testing has a subjective trust element to it because we
yes,
are self-judging our contest, our combat.
yes,
So and that it narrows down to me that whole graph, that whole dual axes there also comes down to an individual fight. Like, is the person I'm fighting, I'm going to enjoy the fight more if the person I'm fighting is a high performer and I trust them.
Yes. Trust
I,
them to follow the rules. Trust them not to hurt me. Trust them not to um
to take an honest
take
shot,
yeah, trust them
to
to yeah,
to not
to
expect me to take something, to, yeah,
yeah.
it's trust. And when you if you walk away from a fight where both of those things have been, where you've gotten both of those things, you've gotten a good test
Mhm.
and you felt like it was a good, honest exchange. Those
Yeah.
are always the best.
Yes. I think that when he talked about trust is off the field, I
Yeah,
think in a lot of ways I look for is this person a problem solver or a problem causer? Do they,
right,
if you insert them into a situation, will they help to solve a problem or will they tend to make it worse? Or do they cause problems?
right.
And that's a level of trust as well. Can I trust this person? They used to say if you drop this person into an area where the organization wasn't known, could you trust them to be a representative of the organization? Could you trust them to build the organization there?
Hmm.
Could you, I think the first one is important. Would you trust them as a representative? Is this somebody, or is this somebody you'd have to say, well, this person is a, don't mind them, that they're an exception. It's just, I recall years ago, a person who had the rank, the showed all that and had the accoutrements of that and was acknowledged to be of a certain status and behaved very badly. And was heckled and spoke out of turn and did various things and made a joke out of everything. And people would, I was appalled when I first saw them. People say, oh, that's just him. He's always done that. Well, he shouldn't. That, yeah,
Right.
that's terrible behavior. It's a terrible example.
Well, and so for you, your trust in that person was negligible.
Yes,
Right.
by because of their outward behavior.
Yeah.
There
Well,
are other,
and
yeah.
what else have you got?
Well, yeah. Well, there are people whose outward behavior has all, as I described some people before, they have all the seeming and none of the reality. They're 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 like a sponge that has been quickly dipped in grape juice, but the essence has not, the core is still a dry, shriveled, useless thing with just the coloring of the veneer of
Okay.
semen on the outside. And um, there's a lot of do I do I trust myself? Do I trust my gut? Do I trust my
Oh,
own? Yeah, because they're time, we are, if we listen to ourselves, we have the ability sometimes to infer from unspoken cues, from other things, something that just doesn't seem right.
right. Well,
And
there's also the old saying that if someone is nice to you but is not nice to a white person, they're not
yeah,
nice.
yes. I would always, so at a tournament, particularly a big tournament, there is a table where people will sign in and the people at the table are keeping track of wins and losses and information. Well, a lot of those people for a lot of years were very close friends and associates of mine. And I would always ask them for a report afterwards on who was nice, who was courteous, who was respectful, who was polite, and who wasn't.
Hmm.
And they would give me their insights because is somebody trying to play you, or are they genuine? And yeah, I would gather all the information I could on people. And people behave differently. There are unfortunately people who behave differently to your face than they do when they don't
Sure.
think you're watching. So I was always watching.
I used to tell my squires that I hear everything and I'm usually watching.
Yeah. Um, so I think, but I think it's correct that he was certainly correct in organizations there are little to no metrics for trust.
Yeah.
And and I worked in organizations and agencies where, oh man, the the stuff that some of the people could get away with, they were bringing in money. They were
Yeah.
on the account side, they were bringing in money. They could do all kinds of crap that was completely ridiculous. But uh, yeah, it was even to the point where there was one fellow who well, I know it was he lied to my face about various things that were commitments that had been made. Um, and after I had left that organization, found out that sometime later he had been let go because he'd been um, cooking the books to make the organization, his region,
Oh.
look better on paper.
Hmm.
So he would get bonuses.
Right.
But a client ended up doing an audit and uncovering this and needing if you hear scratching, it's Hank is scratching in his bed because he likes to make a nest. He's yeah, he the a client had to be refunded a huge sum of money and this guy was let go. And it was all kept quiet, but I heard about it. Um, and then this fellow passed away sometime later, and people were saying, "Oh, how great he was!" I'm like, oh, you have no idea. You have no idea. So,
You were playing Ender in that situation, the
yeah,
speaker for the dead.
yeah, yeah. Well, and speaker, I didn't want to speak ill of the dead, but it's like, no, don't tell me what a great person he was. He was not trustworthy, and his performance was faked,
Yeah, right. Well, and
and he sabotaged the previous head of the organization to get her out of the way so he could take over.
oh man.
And he had us do work for a client for cheap, way too much work, way too cheap, no money in it. I raised a red flag about it. I got a lot of crap for raising a red flag about it. Turned out the client was his wife.
Hmm.
Yeah. So there was a lot of crap going. So, but how do organizations, how do they measure trust? And that's a good question because he's right. They really and I think it. How do we end up trusting people?
Well, and that's part of what struck me with this the parallel with our SCA peerage things is that we actually do try and get a handle on that.
Yeah,
This isn't like and he the way I'm sorry, what was that presenter's name? Sinek?
Simon Sinek.
Simon Sinek. He says that you can go to an organization and ask people to point out the untrustworthy asshole, and everybody
Yeah,
can. Same is true for us.
yeah,
And but in the difference is that they didn't get hired and now they're in it, right? One person hires them and puts them on a team, and the team immediately recognizes what kind of person they are.
yeah, yeah,
We're different in that the team is asked, "Do you want to hire this person?" If I can use that sort of analogy, the team is asked, "Do you want this person on your team?" And again, there has to be some sort of consensus that says, yeah, yeah, they belong with us. Let's bring them in. Sometimes we're wrong,
Yes,
and often we're proven wrong, but it's very difficult in that case for us as an organization to admit it.
that's true. And the question of policing our own, as it said, monitoring the behavior of members of the group to make certain that it remains consistent with the high standards that we have, that people are not doing bad things. This is just in the past couple of days resurfaced again, the issue of knights behaving badly and getting away with it for way too long. And I think that the it's also been true that the decision maker, the crown, has overruled the consensus of
Yes,
the the people, the group, and admitted someone into the group and then had occasion to regret it.
right. Yeah,
Um,
often to the detriment of all three parties
yes, the group, the crown, and
and the
the
individual.
yes. I recall, and you probably do too, one elevation that was opposed by the consensus. It was the consensus opposition to the knighting of this person, and I was close enough in the ceremony that I heard the king bent down and said to them, "Don't embarrass me."
Hmm.
Like, well, if you have to say that when
Yeah.
you are doing this, then you,
What's your trust level right there, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah, that kind of says it that you're not trusting, you're hoping.
yeah. Yeah. And I will admit to having uh, been on the opposite side of the consensus in the past and having to just say, well, you know, then you're sort of compelled, we are told, we're then compelled to try and help them raise themselves up.
Yes, yes.
And I've tried to do that.
And
And
I've been
not,
on
not
the,
always,
yeah, I've been on the end and said, no, I have doubts and I will not say yes, and was in a position to say no for now.
yeah,
No for now. Um, I think there are certainly other organizations. I would, when teaching, I would often have group projects because, with with 25 to 30 undergraduates in a class, I was not going to have 25 to 30 individual semester long projects to help
right.
individuals with, and because they needed to learn how to work together. The the question, and I would help them work together and help them set up a team and how they would set up a team and what they would do and how they would divide responsibilities. And I'd give them all kinds of tools to do it. Sometimes they wouldn't. But the ultimate check on that, because I hated group work when I was a student, because there
Yeah,
were always, maybe there was one other person who I could work with, and there were others who didn't do anything. There were some whose work would do some work, but you had to fix it. A lot of that hasn't changed. It's true still. So the one thing I could do was institute something called a peer review or peer assessment, which I
right.
do at the middle of the semester and the end of the semester. And every student on the team was required to fill out a form, and there were several criteria. And they had to evaluate themselves and their teammates um, on this in these categories. And it was like four categories, scoring 1 to 25 and so it would could total up 100. Um, First of all, I have to show them how to add 25 to 25 to 20. But there were things like, is collegiality, cordiality,
Yeah,
can they work well together? Can they collaborate?
right.
Yeah, do they deliver their work on time? Are they timely? Is it of good quality? Um, there were things like that. And it said in the syllabus, um, and said in the project assignment, said everywhere I could say it, I take these very seriously and they will affect your grade. And there were sometimes very high performers I'd give a bonus to.
Okay.
But if somebody was rated at very low, below a certain level, like below 70 out of 100, I required an explanation. And the students were usually forthcoming with it and said
Hmm.
they were hard to communicate with. They didn't
Right.
turn the work in on time. They didn't do what they said. They had to be rewritten or they didn't do it at all. They didn't come to any practices for the presentation. They didn't know their part. They didn't, all of those things. And I
And those are
would,
fairly objective criteria.
yes, but those performance criteria affected the trust. They did not end up
Sure.
trusting this person because they had not delivered. They'd not been as good as they were, not delivered, didn't do what they say they would do. And I would take off. I had a way of calculating it where I wouldn't go just based on one teammate's opinion because that could
Right.
be subjective personality interaction. But if there was a consensus, I'd add up the consensus points. I'd divide by the number of participants, and I'd take that as a multiplier for the grade that the work got.
Okay.
And there were students who failed because of
Yeah.
because they didn't do the work. And then I'd get complaints from the student. Well, it's not fair that we're evaluated by read the syllabus. It's in the syllabus. Here's what it says. Said it from the beginning. If you didn't like that, you didn't have to take the class. So,
But I would submit to you though, and I mean that all sounds like the fairest way you can conduct something like that.
yeah,
Um, that's still an objective sort of criteria that you're using. That's performance
it is
based.
performance.
There's also the kind of personality and the way Sinek describes as toxic, where you can still be a high performer, but if you're constantly undermining somebody on the team, or you're going behind their back and you're talking to other team members and you're trying to push them out or whatever, that is
Yeah.
a low trust. You can still be a high performer. You can still turn all your stuff in. You can still, your part of it is always good, but the team, or at least
Well,
some portion of the team, can't trust you.
yes. And I do recall several instances like that. For one of the first things the team would have to do is decide on a group project, decide on what the subject of the project was going to be. And it was a advertising or marketing class, and they'd be picking a company. And so, and there were a couple of times that one student gung ho to do a particular thing and had it all mapped out, knew what they wanted to do, and bullied their way through getting that chosen because the other students didn't have this either a strong thought about it or didn't care or didn't know enough and the student got their way and then tried to do all the work themselves, didn't involve them, left them out of things. It wouldn't listen to input, wouldn't listen to corrections. And in a couple of cases, the other students wanted to bail. Wanted to form their own team. And I said, look, here's what's going on. I talked to them. I say, here's what's going on. Nobody wants to work with you. So you want to keep working on this particular project, you're doing it on your own. But the other students want to form a different team because you're not letting them do anything.
And I think that is the balance of those things is where leadership becomes apparent.
Yeah.
One person taking the lead and saying, well, if nobody has a strong opinion or a good idea or whatever, let me propose this. But then you have to bring everybody along with you.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think you could be a leader in that situation. I mean, he had the opportunity to be a leader and failed.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So,
And
and that's, I
yeah.
mean, it's hard for me to, it's hard for me to negatively judge somebody because they've got a strong personality in a group.
Well,
But,
but that's a different set of skills. Leading a group and bullying a group are not the same thing.
right,
Um,
right.
we've
But I'm
talked
saying,
before about the difference between leadership and management, but
yes.
yeah, um, yeah,
But again, so this again reflects in our organization how you can be a high performer and not be trusted.
we've seen that even with people who performed well enough to win the crown,
Hmm.
but were not
Well,
considered
and the trust
trustworthy.
we place in somebody when we induct them into one of these orders,
Yeah,
the trust we are placing in them is that you will be a good example, that you'll be a good example of the thing that I hold dear, that I respect, because
yeah,
I'm part of this group. I do not want you to bring shame on this thing. This is the thing we are going to trust you with. And that's the main thing when we are deciding whether or not it goes beyond pros. We talked about this. We talk about this still in meetings that
yeah,
once you hit your performance levels, right? Now we can start talking about you. We don't care about you until you meet these sort of minimum performance levels. So when you're inducted into one of these orders, the assumption should be that your performance level is already high, is
yeah,
already bigger than it, better than average. Now we just have to do the difficult, more subjective work of deciding whether or not you can be trusted.
yeah.
And
Many years ago, so it has to have been, yeah, it was prior to 1983 when I was knighted. Um, a knight count came to me and said, it's far easier for a gentleman to learn to be competent with a sword than it is for a skilled barbarian to learn manners.
hmm, yeah,
And I thought, well, yeah, but I'm not discounting the possibility, because I have known people who learned the the gentle graces, through exposure to
hey,
some
I'm
of
right
us
here. Okay,
pinky raising types, right?
yeah, and
See, there it is. It's out there.
yeah, yeah. No, I get it, and we still. I don't know that we have talked about it in these terms so much lately in the last however many years, but it's certainly whether anybody realizes it or not, it's the thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, yeah,
Do I trust you with my reputation?
right, yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly it. And to me, that's something the crown should be asking themselves. And your anecdote of someone being "Don't embarrass me."
Yeah.
I've never been the type of crown that feels like I get any particular cachet from the people that I elevate.
Right.
I,
Didn't, yeah.
I know there are some that do feel like I've elevated this many people or I've elevated these particular people and aren't they splendid? That's because of me. I've never I have forgotten that I've elevated people because and to my embarrassment sometimes they said, "Well, you elevated me." Oh, really? Well, good for you, I guess, because for me it wasn't important
Yeah.
to me that I did it. I was acting on a consensus.
Right.
They did it. It's the thing they did. My involvement in it was ceremonial. So yeah, it didn't mean that much to me as it meant to you. And I've elevated people way more times than you've been elevated. So
Yeah.
forgive me.
No, I think the idea I am trusting you with my reputation. We are trusting you with the reputation of all of us. You now have to carry that.
Yeah,
And that's significant. Do I trust you with that? Do I um and it's and are you ready to be trusted with that? Because some people are not yet ready. They can be, they have it in them to assume that burden, that
right.
that task eventually, but are not yet ready for it. Um, and I, you know, I think gut feeling, subjectivity, not everything can be reduced to objective criteria, nor should it be. I
Agreed.
think that because we are not simply analytical machines, we are feeling beings as well, and we are intuitive beings as well. And so I think the challenge, though, sometimes is articulating that to other people. You say,
Yeah.
look, I see their performance, I see their skill, I see what they can do, but when it comes down to it, there's something I don't trust in them. Well, what is it?
Hard to say.
Hard to say, but it doesn't feel as if when they speak that they are the same person to everyone, that they treat all people with the same respect. It doesn't seem, I don't I don't get that feeling. I don't it's something feels off. They tell you in on any kind of self-defense training school,
Hmm.
trust your gut. If a situation looks wrong, if a person looks wrong, something looks off, trust it.
Yeah.
There's reasons we can sense that. Um, and I often default to logic and cues, looking for pre-indicator cues of things and stuff like that, and talk about when I'm thinking about stuff. But yeah, I it's important that we trust is an emotion too. And
Yeah.
so how are we sensing that? Well, it's an emotional response. Well, to what? Well, that requires some thought and it can be challenging to articulate, but essentially
Well,
comes down to I get a bad feeling.
right. And you're right. I think we want to rely on reason enough that we are not simply falling to biases.
Yeah, it's not that I don't like this person. It's that
Right.
I don't trust them in some
Yeah,
way.
well, I've liked plenty of people that I couldn't trust.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are people I'll associate with or have a beer with or
Right. Yeah, that's the two beer thing, right?
yeah.
I mean, the question is, it's almost like if I have one beer with them, okay. If I have a second beer with them, somebody might see me with them.
And might take it as an endorsement
Yes.
of them, not simply public courteousness,
Right. Even
public courtesy.
cordiality.
Yeah, cordiality, politeness, even. They might take it as an endorsement. Um,
Right.
yeah.
So,
Well, it's like who does an organization, like a charitable organization, accept money from?
ah,
That's
yeah, we've talked about that. But
yeah.
to me, money's money. And I'd rather get it from the person who gained it not by their hard work or whatever, but I'll take some of that money that you didn't
Yeah,
earn.
I just don't want to redeem
No, certainly
their
not.
redeem
And it,
their public persona by doing that. I mean, that's one of the and this is a lengthy debate. And Christopher Hitchens, the writer, wrote about Mother Teresa accepting money from really bad people to do the work she did. Also, when there are more reports about how she actually believed that suffering was saintly, and so she didn't help. And there's a whole bunch of stuff about. I'm not going to get into debating the works of Mother Teresa, except that was an issue. It was raised as an issue, her accepting money from bad people to do her work. And there are like museums that have wings
oh yeah,
donated by people who've done bad things, and the names are being taken off, but the money is not being returned.
I
So
heard just recently I heard somebody reference that even Al Capone opened soup kitchens,
yeah,
and you know, I say in general, like as you said, take the money. You don't have to endorse the individual. If that is a condition on accepting the money, don't.
yeah.
But
It,
otherwise,
it,
the money itself, I don't feel the money itself is tainted by its association.
nah, it's a question. That's a debate, I think, on a case by case basis. I think certainly there are accepting like a politician accepting an endorsement of somebody, like a bad person endorses a candidate. The candidate, there are candidates who said, I don't care who endorses me, I'd rather have an endorsement than not. And there are others who say, I don't want this person's endorsement. They're a bad person. So,
Yeah, well, if that person's endorsement they think will taint their campaign, then yeah, certainly. But
yeah,
again, it's the exchange, right? It's the will I'll endorse you
if you
if, right?
except the endorsement itself is seen as can be seen as an association, and that's
Well,
political publicity and
well, I
games
had this
and
I
all
had
of
this
that.
argument with somebody we both know a little while ago, and it was a this person was complaining how one administration had paid had given a celebrity a certain amount of money to appear at a rally and perform,
Hmm.
okay? And another person had given money to a campaign to the campaign of their opponent and gotten what amounts to a cabinet seat.
Ooh,
And he said, "Well, they're the same thing. You're giving." No, they're exactly the opposite thing.
yeah,
A performer getting money to perform is just being a performer. When the election's over, they just go back to being a performer. This is someone who paid for influence in the government. And the fact that they couldn't see that difference is what basically ended. We can't have this discussion.
yeah.
You're
They don't.
conflating these things
Yeah,
so horrendously that I can't. We're not even talking about the same thing.
I was at my alma mater, my undergraduate alma mater, a couple of years ago for a trip to the archives. I was doing some research and sitting with the archivist and university historian because there'd so much building had taken place since
Hmm.
I'd been an undergraduate. And he was talking about the amount of money that a person or institution or foundation or charity or whatever the foundation has to donate now to get a building named after them. And it was mind-boggling. It was amazing the amount of money in that, there's a lot of fucking money there. in all those buildings. So, um, but that there have been issues of, well, whose name comes off a building? Or is it a new building? Or are we renaming a building? Well, if the family donated, there's certainly cases where buildings and universities and streets and public buildings,
Military
using,
installations.
yeah, were named for people whose history was unsavory. And that's being changed. And I think that's actually a positive thing.
Yeah, I think in general it is because it's
Yeah.
again, you're talking about a sort of quasi-redemptive
Yeah.
act,
Yeah.
and it's not the same thing. You know, all the Carnegie buildings and Rockefeller centers and all those kinds of things where those men made huge contributions because it was necessary to maintain their tax breaks.
Yes. Yeah.
And that incentive is gone now,
Well, and
has
they
been
did,
taken away.
yeah, a lot of them made money before the taxes were not what they are now, but it was the tax structure on corporation. Well, anyway,
Right,
different
right, no,
subject.
yeah,
But yes, redemptive but also practical from an investment point of view.
right.
Um,
And we hear now rich people don't give to charities. They start foundations
Nations. Yes.
or trusts or something in which they can it's a pretty nefarious really where you can donate money to your own foundation. It
Mhm.
counts as a charitable organization, but you control what happens to the money in the foundation
Yes.
and who
I
gets it.
honestly, if we recently have had a couple of very large lottery jackpots, multi-state
Hmm.
lottery jackpots in the excess of $1 billion. And uh, looking into that, it's like, the first thing is a good attorney.
Hmm.
And the second thing is probably setting up some kind of corporation and becoming an employee of the corporation,
Oh yeah.
and then using the funds in that way rather than just because there are a lot of uh, the people who have money have ways of safeguarding their money and making more money.
Hmm.
And did you know that if you get um like as a frequent flyer, you get gold status, then upgrading your seat costs less than if you are of a lower status.
No.
It costs more to upgrade your seat from a lower status flyer than if you're already like gold status or platinum or higher. It costs you far less to upgrade your seat from there.
Well, and that I guess that makes sense from a business. You've already spent the money with them that gets you the upgrade. So I guess
Yeah.
that doesn't bother me so much, but
But
privilege breeds more privilege.
it just is an example of if the money has been available to spend, it means that things come easier. And you said it once, and this is something that I just thought of because I read a comment about money solving problems. You said that um, if you have money, things that are problems become inconveniences.
Well, yeah,
And you said something like that, and
the
I've
quote
remembered
was
that.
from my best friend's father, who was probably at the time in high school was probably the richest guy I knew. Um, and he was not. I mean, they lived modestly. I mean, it wasn't. They weren't. There was no such thing as mansions where I grew up.
Yeah.
They had a nice house, and he was a real estate developer. So he was a millionaire. If you looked at all of the assets he
Hmm.
had, he would have been considered a multimillionaire. Doesn't mean much now, but he said that when you've got money, small problems stay small problems. Uh, When you don't have money, small problems are big problems.
Yeah.
The example he used, if you've got money and your car gets a flat tire, you call a tow truck and you get the tire fixed and that's it.
Yeah. It's an
If
inconvenience.
Yeah, if you have no money and you have a flat tire, you can't go to work. You can't earn money to fix the tire. If you don't have the money to fix it right there, what do? You're you are in trouble.
Like Terry Pratchett's Captain Vine's boots theory
Hmm.
of economics that essentially if a person only has $1 to spend on a pair of boots and they buy a $1 pair of boots and where it lasts for a year, they've by the end of 10 years, they've spent $10 and they have nothing.
Right.
But if the person has $10 to spend on a high quality pair of boots, at the end of 10 years,
He'll still
they'll
have boots.
still have boots.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that whenever possible, I get the quality tools. I get, I get, um, it just, but that was not always the case. I
Well,
could not always do that.
the advice I got when I was in school, when looking for art supplies and stuff, it was always don't get the cheapest. Get
Yeah.
the very best you can afford.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Don't overextend. That just gets you in, don't, that'll
Trouble.
get you in more trouble. But get the very, very best you can afford.
Yeah.
So that's always been good advice for just about anything, really.
Yeah.
So, but we
Um,
wandered away from our subject.
we have trust. Well, how do you trust? You're going to buy art supplies. You're going to buy a brand of paints.
Right?
You're going to buy a brand of oil paints, for example, which is something I know a little bit about. How do you decide which ones to get? How do you trust that you're going to get what you say you're going to get? You're going to travel somewhere. How do you trust that when you get there, it's going to be what the advertising said it was going to be? Um, in general, I've found that people trust peer-reviewed sources more than they trust advertising.
Yeah.
But I found that you have to analyze the peer-reviewed things as well. Many years ago, I was looking for, we wanted to go somewhere warm for a vacation, and I was looking at um, different reviews of different places, and there was one place where the only negative reviews were I couldn't get my favorite brand of soft drink. I couldn't
Oh.
get I had to bring my sunscreen with me. I had to be it was there isn't a McDonald's nearby. The complaints were from people whose judgment I would not trust. So I by default, trusted the other comments.
Right.
And it,
It's almost a double negative
yes,
creating a positive.
yes, exactly. Um, yeah, the the story of the teacher who said a double negative can be a positive, but there's no example of a double positive being a negative. And one student piped up and said, "Yeah, right." So, um,
Sarcasm notwithstanding.
yeah. Um, so I think, yeah, trust is important. Trust is essential. We have talked before about how, as human beings, we evolved to have communities and we evolved to be social beings,
Mhm.
and that really was the success of the human species,
Yes.
that community and that group. And when and initially groups were small,
Mhm.
and you could trust everybody in it, and anyone who couldn't be trusted was excluded from the group, which was
The
death.
worst thing that could happen to you.
Yes,
I mean,
exile was. And exile was still considered a terrible punishment in the Middle Ages. Um, so I think that we have developed, as part of that evolution, we've developed the ability to have those feelings of about whether we can trust someone.
yes.
Um, as long as we keep checking and make sure we aren't fooling ourselves because of wishful thinking, or the opposite. So,
Yeah. Um, and like we said earlier, I think that you've got to balance intuition with reason
yes. Yep.
to avoid the pitfall of bias.
Exactly. Yep.
I think we've talked about this before, and my personal belief is that we're all born, we are hardwired to be racist. That's refuted, but I mean at a very genetic level, we are tribal, and we have to be taught that things that are not familiar to us are not necessarily bad for us.
Well, that is my initial reaction is to disagree with you.
I
But
understand.
I want to I would want to research that. That is something I'm not simply going to rely on gut feeling to evaluate. That is something I'd want to say, um, I would want to analyze that. I understand uh, the initial, what seems to be an initial lack of trust of others, but I don't think that starts from birth. I think that is instilled from a very young age. But this is something we would have to research and find the research on to see, because I think children may be fearful, but there are also children who have a lack of fear. So
Oh, it's certainly, I'm, yes, and I'm not saying that, and I think, I also like to think we're breeding it out.
um
But my point is only that I feel that this is a nat I don't want to say natural, in a form of it's natural, it's basic, but so that if I believe it of myself that this is a natural tendency of mine, I can then make sure I apply reason first,
okay. So
right?
I see where you're going with that, but I'm I your premise, I see where you are going with that, and I see the value you're placing in acknowledging your own biases and using reason to combat them. And I think that's commendable, but I'm not convinced that I agree with your premise
Oh, all
that
right.
that derives from. Okay?
Yeah, and I certainly haven't done, clinical studies on any of this
Yeah.
stuff.
Well,
But I think that it's,
yeah.
but I think that if using that as a basis for judging how people interact, I think it yields a positive result. You can look at how somebody reacts racially or tribally or classist or whatever it is. It's a it's a distrust of the other. I think is
I think
part of our human makeup.
and it's I think a lot of it is learned.
It-
But that we're
yes,
getting
I think
into a nature versus nurture debate, and we are really, really far afield from where we
yes.
began. So,
Well, except that like I said, this goes to the trust and reason thing,
Hmm.
that there's an instinctive thing you trust, and maybe it's not. You just trust that which is familiar, and you
People tend
distrust that which is
to,
not.
yeah, I've certainly seen in some in studies about how, say, people tend to hire or um, buy from people who look like them or emulate them or are similar to them, and it's a sales tactic
Yeah,
for a salesperson to emulate the stance, the behavior, the sitting, the mannerisms of somebody, to dress like them and so on, to build that,
yeah.
artificially build that trust relationship. Um, so certainly people use that, but that's manufactured. So
In that case,
but
certainly,
yeah,
it's called mirroring. It's a
yeah,
technique. It's a
yeah.
sales technique. Yeah,
So, well, we've certainly touched on a number of different and other wide related but wide-ranging
yeah,
topics with
yeah.
this. So,
Well, we never. When have we ever just stuck strictly to one narrow subject ever?
I don't think we have.
No,
I don't think that's what we do.
I don't
So,
think we're surprising anybody by
no.
by wandering off a little bit. But I think we have certainly.
Yes.
I think we've gotten through our original discussion.
Yes. But I have a question for you.
All
Have you
right.
ever watched a movie called Escape Plan with it's the first on-screen pairing of Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger?
I don't think so.
It's really bad. I watched
How
part of it. I didn't
when was
watch
it? When was it? When was it
uh
done? Oh, as late as that.
2013,
As late as that.
2013, I think. The two sequels were direct to video.
Did they both
Um,
have Arnold and Sylvester in them?
no, they both had Sylvester, but not Arnold,
Okay.
and they were direct to video. Anyway, it came on TV, and I watched it in kind of bewilderment and disbelief at this is really bad. This is really, really bad. Um, so unexpected movie review, but it was just a question as a connoisseur of bad movies. I thought you might have seen this, but
Well, I'm not the connoisseur, say, or at least I'm not the gourmand that our friend William is.
William is, yeah, he's, yeah.
Um,
But whew,
but I've never seen it. But certainly Arnold and Sylvester have both done some very bad films. Putting them
yes,
together certainly does not guarantee it. I wouldn't
yeah.
even put odds on it being a good film.
Well, and people used to say of Richard Burton that if he was in a movie, it was either very, very good or very, very bad. And that's very, very true.
That's
So,
fair. Well, an actor as big as Richard Burton, I mean, who played roles as largely as he did,
yeah,
can, yeah, can, if the script isn't right for that kind of portrayal, it becomes a bad movie instantly.
yeah.
But if it
And
does,
and
he's the right guy for it.
he needed money for, you know, alimony or whatever. So
Well,
rehab,
now I have to search
addicted
out
rehab. So
all three of these films, I guess. But
the Escape Plan 2, and the Escape Plan 3.
man,
Dave Bautista is in the second and third ones.
okay. So those had to be in the late 2018, 2019, somewhere in there.
No, it was I think they followed on a couple years after. Very low
Oh,
budget. Just ugh. I
hmm.
haven't watched those. Just and I didn't watch all of the first one. I was like, oh, this is turning it off. I'll look up the plot. I'll look up what happens. Yeah, okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a shame. I get. I mean, I kind of like Dave Bautista.
I didn't even watch his in
No,
that.
okay.
No, I think he's actually um I think he's a pretty engaging screen presence.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think he takes doing the job seriously,
he does. Yeah.
but that's where now we're really way off.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. So I thought I would take it just that much further
uh,
afield.
all right.
So I think that's it. So please thank you for joining us. Please like, subscribe, share, write to us, comment, suggest topics,
Yep.
tell us,
Disagree.
disagree. If you think that was the greatest movie ever made, please tell us you're wrong, but please tell us. Um, and until we see you next time, be thou
A good night.
and true.